Welcome to Win with the Law with your host, Gary Newland. In the Win with the Law podcast, your host, Gary Newland, partner at Newland and Newland LLP, invites guests who are experts in the personal injury law arena and other areas of law of interest to discuss topics relevant to the general public. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, newlandlaw.com. Now here's the host of Win with the Law, Gary Newland.
Welcome to Win with the Law. Today we have as our guest Gerardo Badiano, an immigration attorney from Arlington Heights, Illinois. And what we're going to talk about is asylum and deferred action. Mr. Badiano is one of the most prestigious immigration attorneys in the Chicago metropolitan area. He helps in all sorts of forms of immigration. But again, we're going to focus on deferred action and asylum. We all hear the term asylum fairly regularly. We hear this term deferred action on the news, but I wonder how much we really understand about it. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Badiano. Can you please tell us about your background?
Yes, hi. My name is Gerardo Badiano. I'm an attorney, do immigration. I've been doing this for about 26 years now. It's always fun. We've always been trying to help people. It's great to try to help people that are coming to our country, and help them in whatever way we can.
Now, can you tell us, let's start with asylum. What we hear in the news talk about people asking for asylum all the time. What does that mean?
So this is a hot topic right now. So there's a lot of people coming over the border and, they're being asking for asylum. What that means is people are crossing the border because they're being persecuted in their country. So they're fleeing their country. It could be for political reasons. It could be for many reasons. And they cannot be protected in their country. So they come here to get protected. Asylum cases are really difficult cases. People believe that, anyone can be granted asylum. There's some sort of misconception in the general public that people are being allowed here and they're just going to stay here. That's not the case. Again, when people come across the border, most of the people are get processed. Okay, and once they get processed, they get put in the process to be sent back to their countries. And one of the things that you do when you do asylum cases is that you tell the government, okay, this person needs to be protected. Now, again, there has to be certain evidence that you got to provide to the court so they can verify whether the person, has a credible fear, he has a valid reason for staying in the country.
I've seen it on TV where someone gets on United States soil and they ask for asylum. Is that what's involved? They have to ask the officials for protection?
Correct. So what's supposed to happen is, when somebody is crossing the border, gets taken by a patrol agent, there's two things that can happen. One, in either case, the agent needs to process this person and either verify whether they have a credible fear and ask them questions about it. On the alternative, say, well, the person is going to be asking for asylum. They say, okay, not a problem. You're going to get a court date, and they get, let go in a sense, and they say, okay, do you have court on such that date? So one of the things that happens too is not that most people just take off and never come to court. Actually, they're given certain requirements to follow. They're really strict requirements. Sometimes they put ankle monitors on them so they know where these people are at all times. They have to be checking up with the border agents, through phones, every so often, every week, every month. They got to let them know where they're at. And if for some reason any of these people, break those rules, then the officials come to get them and then they get deported.
Are they allowed to work while they're waiting for their asylum hearing?
So that's a good question. So what happens is once the process start, they're in court, and then you ask for asylum, you have to fill out an application for an asylum application. Now, once that's filled out, after 180 days, you have to wait 180 days, then these people can ask for a work permit. And the reasoning behind it is, a case shouldn't be taking that long. It's taking that long. Therefore, they can ask for a work permit.
And there's a backlog, and that's why cases take long, right?
Correct.
Now, Tell me, what is a classic case or types of cases where someone is entitled to asylum?
So there could be many cases. One case, for example, it could be a spouse that is being persecuted by their significant other. I had a case where the husband, almost threatened his wife. He actually abused her verbally. She abused her physically. And there's laws in certain countries that to protect these people, but in reality, they're never really followed. This person, was abused, like I said, physically, and this person was given a slap on the hand. And husband pretty much he moved around, and the husband kept just following her, and telling her that he was gonna kill her. So at that point, since the authorities are not doing anything, these people, if they don't do anything, they don't flee their country, they're basically going to get killed.
So basically what you're saying, in some countries, they may have laws against abusing a spouse, but they don't really enforce them.
Correct.
And because that spouse may harm that person, they can seek asylum in the United States?
Correct, but it's not just any type of harm. It's a harm where it's going to be so great that somebody's going to get killed, or something bad is going to happen. It's not just that this person is going to get punched and then all of a sudden that they're going to come and protect them. You got to prove more than that. You got to prove that there's going to be great bodily harm to this person. Something greater is going to happen.
I read a case recently. It had to do with female circumcision.
Correct.
And with respect to that issue, that's in some countries can be normal behaviors within certain communities in some countries where that process is what's done. Is that a basis possibly to get asylum?
It could be possibly a basis depending on the situation. If you have obviously someone who doesn't want to be circumcised and they're going to be forced into it, there could be medical conditions to it where these people, they get circumcised, something's going to happen to them. It could be somewhere where this person doesn't want to get circumcised, and then the authorities are going to go after that for religious reasons. So yes, it could be a basis depending on the situation.
And then it seems like there can be persecution within a family, within a community, and also by the federal government of a particular country. Does that happen too?
That happens too, particularly, for example, Cuba. There's persecution, or China. There's political persecution against people for speaking out or saying anything against the government. And if it comes to persecution where there's disappearances. Actually, there's some process going on in Cuba not long ago where people got incarcerated, people disappear. There's certain things that happens to these people, and they have to be protected. They have to leave the country, and if they don't do that, they're obviously gonna extreme cases gonna get killed. So yes, and again, it's not something where someone says, well, I was speaking out against the government and the prosecutor. You have to prove it. It's not something where you're just going to say, well, this happened to me, and all of a sudden because you're from a certain country, they're going to say, well, not a problem. You still got certain things you got to do.
So how do you prove that your issues when all your possessions, all your information, any records about you are in that other country?
Well, there could be medical issues. If you were beaten, you were incarcerated, you can prove, that you have medical issues because of it, scars. You can have mental issues where, you have to be going to a therapist, to be treated. And, you have PTSD, they can prove that, yes, something did happen to this person. If you were incarcerated, sometimes you're able to obtain information showing that you were incarcerated. You can show documents from each country. Actually, the State Department has a website where you can actually verify the situation in certain countries, and then so you can get things like that nature where you get articles from the State Department, articles from different places showing, yes, this is what happened, or this is what's happening in this country. And that's how you do it. Or you can get affidavits or statements from people that know what happened to you, and so you can do it that way too.
So, for example, if someone wants to claim asylum from a country like, let's say, England, that might be more difficult than perhaps claiming asylum from some third world country that has a record of abuse of people. Is that fair?
That's fair to say. Yeah, I mean, it'd be really difficult to prove that, for example, someone from England, that, an asylum case in England, because it's a country that, for the most part, protects its citizens and protects its people. And so it'll be a lot more difficult to prove that the government is not protecting you. Because one of the requirements on asylum is not only there's certain requirements too, that if you move within a certain country, that you're not going to be protected. So let's say you live in London, the second one's talking in England, and they say, well, you can move to Ireland, and Northern Ireland, and you have to be protected. So if you are able to do that, to move to someplace else within your country, then you don't qualify for asylum because you have done that. So an asylum is an extreme case where you can't stay where you're at. If you stay where you're at, then something's gonna happen to you.
And with respect to asylum, is there a high percentage of people that seek asylum that receive asylum?
Most of the people, I'll be honest, don't receive asylum. They're difficult cases. I would say, top of my head, probably about a third of the people that seek asylum will actually get approved for asylum, if not less. So it's not something where most people will just say, yes, I need asylum, and this is my my evidence, and they will get approved right away.
Are some people trying to game the process and they're asking for asylum, hoping that that'll allow them to find a method to live in our country?
Yes, I'm not gonna say it's not. I mean, and that's why I say, people have this conception that it's really easy to fool the system, and all you gotta do is request asylum, and it's gonna happen. No, it's not. I mean, most of the people that come, they do require a lot of evidence of these cases, of credibility from the person too. So if you don't have anything, they're just not gonna grant it to you.
So what happens then if it's not granted? Do they just stick you on a bus or an airplane at that point?
No, at that point, if you lose your case, you can always appeal it, of course. But once the appeal process is over, you get an order to get deported. Sometimes they will allow you to leave on your own, or in alternative, if you don't leave, they'll literally will get you and then put you in a plane.
So to understand this process a little bit, so someone comes to the country, they ask for asylum, and an asylum hearing could it take years to get an asylum hearing?
It depends on what part of the country you are. There's some instances in some states where it's faster than other states. Some court systems are faster than others.
But it could take months or years. Is that fair?
That's fair to say. I mean, it could take a couple of years, if not more.
And then what happens isn't it true that people then establish a life here, waiting for their hearing, and they get married and have children? Is that what goes on sometimes?
Sometimes that can happen. That yes, you get someone who's staying here, they're waiting in the process, and then they get married. And then, but however, just because you do that doesn't necessarily mean that you get to stay. I mean, it means that while you're waiting for your case, if there's sort of possibilities to request, your permanent residency or to some sort of status in the U.S., you could do that, but it's not that easy either. I mean, it's not something where.
I remember you and I had talked about a case quite a while ago where someone had claimed that they had fallen in love with a U.S. citizen and tried to establish that they should be allowed to remain because of their marriage.
Right.
And we had discussed it, and we reviewed the investigation of the government, and they checked out everything and determined that the marriage was not legit. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember that. I mean, and that can happen. People believe that it's easy to fool the government. It's not. I mean, they will check everything. If they think that there's anything that it's fishy, that they will investigate. It'll take a while. Like in that case, I remember that case. It took about a year or so before they found everything. But they check phone records. They verify with the neighbors. They verify with the parents of with the person. I mean, they verify with everyone. So, I mean, it takes a while, but it's not easy. And then obviously, what happens, even if in that particular case, obviously, when they found out, even they do have a child that was born in the U.S., well, that doesn't necessarily mean that she got to stay in the U.S. At that point, you get deported. Just that a lot of people have the conception that if you have a child in the U.S., well, automatically you have to stay in the U.S. No, that doesn't happen.
What about military service? Does military service entitle you to citizenship?
There's certain benefits to becoming to be in the military, and the yes, you can get residency, but it's really tricky. It's not as easy as some people get believe. Or sometimes what happens is if you have there's a person in the military that have parents that were here illegally and they're obviously born here and they're in the military, there's certain benefits that they could help their parents become residents.
You just brought up something. This is another set of terms that's thrown around so much on the news. What is the difference between residency and citizenship?
So residency, it's called a legal resident in the United States, means that the U.S. government, you're telling the U.S. government, I live in the U.S., I want to be entitled to live in the U.S. and work in the U.S. And so you legally stay here, and you live in the United States. Now, that doesn't entitle you to vote, however, entitle you to work legally. Now, the problem with that, it's not a problem really, but what happens is you don't get to vote, you get certain benefits to it, and then if for some reason you move abroad permanent, let's say you're from Mexico, you go to Mexico, then you lose your residency. And then if you want to come back, then at that point you have to apply again and get a new residency. Now, citizenship means that you're a citizen of the United States, and then at that point you never lose your citizenship. You get to stay here as long as you want. Now, to become a citizen, you first have to be a legal resident, and then after a period of time, then you become a citizen. Okay. You can apply to citizenship. They do have a test that you got to take, and there's certain requirements that they got to verify. So not anyone can just apply for it and you automatically get it. But yeah, that's it's what I tell my clients is the best thing to do. I mean, if you're living in the U.S. and you have a chance to become a citizen, just to go ahead and do it.
So residency allows you to work, and does it also allow you to travel freely within the United States?
Yes. I mean, once you're a legal resident, you can travel abroad or in the United States. You can, you get to go, to any country you want because you're just going visiting. So as long as you can prove that you're going to another country just to visit for vacation purposes, but your permanent residency is in the United States, then that's fine. You can come and go. Now, one of the requirements, for example, of leaving the country and then coming back is if you stay out of the country for more than 6 months, then at that point, immigration, can argue that you obviously don't live in the U.S. anymore. It's not your permanent country anymore. And at that point, they can start a process to try to take your residency from you. It's not going to happen automatically, but there's things to it.
Well, before we go to deferred action, I want to ask you a question about whether you're here as an undocumented person, a permanent resident or not. Do you still have the same right to file a personal injury case or a workers' compensation case as every other citizen?
Yes.
Okay.
You do.
So if you're not a U.S. citizen, you're still protected by the laws of the United States. Is that correct?
Correct. I mean, and you're more an expert at this, but however, if you are working here, the laws, labor laws or personal injury laws protect you regardless of, your legal status. So you should, if something does happen to you, you have a right to sue and then, try to get compensation on that. There's certain limits to it as in the case of workers' compensation, but, I mean, you have the same rights as anyone else.
And so if someone is injured at work or in a bad car accident, does taking action to get compensation, will that result in their deportation or are there protections for them?
Not at all. I mean, well, personal injury cases and work compensation cases are state law cases. So anything that has to do with immigration is a federal level case. And there's something in the news right now going on precisely about, Texas trying to, apply some immigration laws, but which is not allowed. I mean, there's a clear distinction between federal law, which deals with immigration, and state law. and anything that has to do with personal injury or a work compensation case has to go at the state level. So at that point, immigration is not even, doesn't find out any about this unless, I guess, somebody tells them about it. However, that they don't get involved in it.
Okay. And so what happens if someone is here as a permanent resident, but they get a DUI? Does that affect their permanent residency?
No, there are certain crimes that will affect you. They're called crimes of moral turpitude. It doesn't have to be felonies. It could be a misdemeanor. And then if you get a crime of moral turpitude, depending on the crime, then yes, it could lead to you losing your residency. So one of the things that happens is when you become a legal resident, you get a card saying you're a legal resident, and that card expires every 10 years.
Is that the infamous green card we hear about?
That's the infamous green card. So the way the government checks on people to call it that is they make it expire every 10 years. So after 10 years, if you have a legal resident, you have to reapply to get it. And then one of the things that happens when you reapply to get a legal residency is they check your background. They take your fingerprinting to verify your criminal history. So then at that point, that's how the government finds out if for some reason you committed a crime. They will find out about it, and then they will put you in a deportation process, proceedings. And then at that point, you could get deported, depending on.
If it has to be an act of moral turpitude, which would be theft, right? Is theft an act of moral turpitude?
Yes, depends on the amount, but yes.
The amount of money, and then rape?
Anything drug related, rape, it could be domestic violence. There are certain crimes that will do it. I mean, there are certain exceptions to it, and there's certain things it's a little more complicated, but there's some things that you can sort of get away with it, but explain away. But but
there's exceptions and general rules. Is that fair?
That's right.
And so each situation has to be evaluated, and that's why probably before pleading guilty, if you're a permanent resident or an undocumented person, you should consult an attorney about how that plea of guilty could affect your attempt later maybe to become a citizen.
That's correct. And that's why there's certain when in criminal law that when somebody pleads guilty to something, at least in the state of Illinois, and I'm pretty sure in the rest of the country, one of the rights that it's read by the judge is to ask them automatically if you're, or they tell them if you're not a U.S. citizen, legal resident, or if you're not a U.S. citizen, this might have immigration implications with immigration, where you might not be able to become a citizen, or they might take your residency away. So if you do have a crime, it'll be a great idea to ask your attorney whether if he knows or she knows about the immigration consequences as to any plea deal, or the alternative for that attorney to put you in touch with an immigration attorney that will help you out and tell you whether that's going to affect you or not. Because it might not affect you going to jail. They might not think about it. It's a misdemeanor. They might think that it's going to be fine. And later down the road, when you try to become a legal resident, or an alternative, if you're a legal resident, we try to extend your residency, then you find that you have a big problem.
So I have a question to ask you. So anytime, like, I want to go to Mexico on vacation, I just book a trip and I go. Can people in Mexico just book a trip and come here anytime they want to visit?
No, they have to apply for a visa. So when you come to the U.S., there's two ways of coming. I guess you will be coming as a non-resident, or you're trying to become as a resident. A non-residency, you're going on vacation. So what the U.S. requires for much everyone, a lot of countries in the world, is you go to the U.S. Embassy in Mexico, in this case, and then you tell them, I'm going to go on vacation to the U.S., and then they verify, a lot of things, if you have money, that, you have a house, they look at the likelihood of you returning to Mexico, that you're really going to come to the U.S. for a visiting trip and go back. And then if they do believe, based on the evidence that you provide them, or the documents that you provide them, then they will give you a visa. It's called a B1 visa. It's a temporary visa to come and visit.
I see. And this is a question a lot of people have, and maybe it's off our initial topic, but I wanted to ask you, so if I have a driver's license in the United States, can I pretty much drive anywhere in the world?
It depends on the country. So most countries, obviously, and it really depends on where you go. Since you're visiting, it's not where you live. They will allow you to drive for the time of short period of time for your vacation time. It's the same as it works actually for the U.S. You can have people visiting from other countries, and at least, for example, in the state of Illinois, they will allow you to drive with your license from a different country as long as you can provide them evidence that you're coming to visit. So you have your passport, you have your visa, you have your showing that you have a legal stay here for a month or whatever you're staying, and then you're able to drive.
I see.
So as long as you go, and for that, I will ask you to, tell people just check in the country you're going to travel to see what the requirements are. Some other countries won't allow you to use your driver's license from the U.S., whatever state you're from. They have a requirement that you get an international license. So there's actually such a thing as an international license where you can obtain one, and then if that country requires that, that's what we have to do before traveling to be able to travel in that country.
It's interesting. Now, earlier we discussed how we were going to talk about deferred action, and what does deferred action mean in terms of immigration?
So deferred action is discretionary protection to certain people. So in this case, we're going to talk about discretionary deferred action as to labor. So immigration laws, like I said, are federal laws, and they're enforced by the federal government. Now, in certain instances, the government says, I'm not going to deport you in the meantime. And the reason I'm not going to deport you is because of, in this case, for example, there's an interest of protecting labor rights. So if a person is here working, let's say illegally, and they're being taken advantage of, and in this case, the state government starts an investigation saying, okay, well, these people, there's child labor, for example, there's happening here. Well, if let's say the children involved are here illegally, well, the state is not going to be able to prosecute these cases because they're not going to come and help. They're going to say, well, if I come and help you, I'm going to get deported. So what happens is, at that point, the government says, okay, there's an interest in protecting these people, at least temporarily, until this investigation takes place, and then they're helping the government to enforce labor laws, and we're going to help them out. And the way they help them out is do this thing called deferred action, which is a protection saying, I'm not going to deport you. Now, this is only temporarily; it's only for 2 years in this case. In the case of labor,
can you reapply, or is it just run out?
It runs out and you can reapply. However, in this particular case of labor law, you have to prove. One of the requirements is that the state government is going to provide you a letter of interest, and a letter saying, yes, we need this worker or this person because we're in an investigation. So let's say after 2 years, the investigation is continuing and they still need you, then they will provide you a second letter saying, okay, still working on this case, we still need this person. So then they'll give you an additional 2 years. Now, if not, let's say the case is over, then at that point, your work authorization, which is what they give you. They don't give you a legal residency, they just give you work authorization, expires, and you're back to square one.
So I've heard on the news, they talk about dreamers all the time, a Dreamers Act, or is that deferred action as well?
That's deferred action as well. Now, a dreamer is someone who was brought in the country as a child. So the idea being, well, they didn't have a choice. This child was brought to the country without their consent, obviously. And
it's a typical situation. The parents immigrated here, and maybe they were undocumented, and they brought their children with them.
Correct.
And of course, their children had no choice because they were little at the time.
Correct. I mean, if you're a child, 1-year-old, even 5-year-old, and your parents are saying, well, we're going to move to, in this case, we're going to the U.S. Well, it's not nothing you can do. You're gonna obviously come with your parents. So the idea of the dreamers is that they didn't have a choice. They didn't break any law in the sense that they didn't have a choice of coming to the U.S. And for all intents and purposes, they've been living here, studying here their entire lives, and therefore the government offered them a protection, saying, okay, defer action again, saying
And they may not even know their native language anymore. This is something where
right. I have instances where clients that actually, there's one case when somebody got deported, and when the person came here when he was a year old, and the person lived here his entire life, and then
we've spent money educating this person his entire
Correct.
life.
you spend money getting this person their entire life,
And then they get
and then
forced to leave.
they forget to leave, and some of these people don't even speak the language or never live in the country, or sometimes they don't even have family in those countries anymore because everybody immigrated to the US. So at that point, you're sending someone who, by all intents and purposes, an American person to this foreign country to them because they never lived there, they don't have family, they don't even speak the language.
And it seems contrary. I mean, I'm just trying to work this through. We just invested in this child, raised this child. The child can be total, as it grows older to be an adult, can be very patriotic. And yet we're telling them, sorry, you have to go back because your parents brought you here when you were 1.
Correct.
And this literally happens?
Well, yes, it happens. It does happen, and that was the idea behind Deferred Action for Dreamers. The idea was to protect them, and that's what happened. People were applying for they were called DACA, which is Deferred Action pretty much, and that was going on for a while. However, that law, there was a case. So then it's whoever already has DACA, that's what we call it. Deferred Action protection right now can still apply for it and keep renewing it. However, the government is not accepting new applications. Whoever has it right now it's protected. If whoever doesn't have it, didn't get to apply for it before, they can apply now.
So let me ask you then. So you have a child that's brought over by their parent. Let's say they're 1. They're educated in our grammar school, junior high, high school. Are they able to get college loans?
Not most of the college loans are backed by the government, so no, they can't. There's certain scholarships provided for people that do not have that are here undocumented. However, they're limited.
Yeah, there's only a finite amount of those being issued. So
correct, and then you do get a lot of people still paying for the parents that brought them, paying for college. I mean, trying to work to try to put their kids through college. However, it's really difficult because college being so expensive and not being any loans for these people. Well,
so let's say they get through college. Can a company legally hire them?
It's labor law, and yes, well, no, and yes. It depends on what the person studied. There's certain the idea being, again, there's certain employment, certain what you call industries where they need certain workers, skilled workers. So if you fall within that category, you might be able to obtain your residency to college, but it's not that easy. I mean, it's only in certain cases. You have to be really, really skilled high up there before they're able to do anything.
So let's say the person graduates with a degree from university, and a Fortune 500 company wants to hire them. Is that just something that's probably not going to take place at that point?
Probably.
Even though they've lived in this country basically their entire life.
Correct.
It's interesting. So basically, with respect to immigration law, do you think the law always makes sense or seems equitable?
No. It's equitable in those instances. However, there's certain things that like we just pointed out, and not to get into big debates, but there's someone who's been living here for their entire lives, by all means, they're American, they should be American citizens at that point. However, they have nothing. I mean, they live here, they abide by the law, they pay their taxes, they do everything they need to do, and at the end of the day, they're told, well, you shouldn't be here, and they get deported. You get families that are destroyed. You get some of these people who already have families, and they could be deported. So, I mean, if there's no legal,
Is there a pathway to citizenship for the Dreamers?
no, not yet. Right now, it's just deferred action. They continue to extend it. The idea being that they're working on something in the government to try to see if they pass something for citizenship or to give them legal residency to begin with. Like I said, at this point, they're not even legal residents. They only have protection every 2 years, not to get deported, and that can be taken away.
Now, to register as a Dreamer or under any form of deferred action, you have to tell the government where you live.
Correct.
And are sometimes people concerned that they're just providing the government information they may use against them somewhere down the road?
Yes, they are. They're concerned about it. They shouldn't. Well, I should say shouldn't, but yeah, they're not supposed to be concerned. I mean, there's a protection where one part of the process doesn't tell the other part where you're at. So if you're asking for deferred action, the idea being you might, even though they have your information, they're not supposed to share it with ICE, which is enforcement, immigration enforcement, to get you deported. So they're not supposed to, at least at this point. I mean, what happens in the future, God knows, but right now, you're protected in that sense.
I see. Well, I want to thank you for joining us. Will you come back again sometime?
Sure, anytime. It's been great.
Okay. And at this point, I'd like to say, thank you so much for your time. We're going to be signing off here from Arlington Heights, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. And I hope you all enjoyed the show and come back next week to hear the next show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
You've been tuning into Win with the Law with your host, Gary Newland. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, newlandlaw.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.